We humans can be very resilient, and some have survived things generally considered to be impossible. From a man who had a drill go through his head to a woman who survived a plane crash. Join us as we count 10 people who survived the impossible.
Number 10.
Aron Ralston. On May 2003, while Aron Ralston was on a canyoneering trip in Blue John Canyon, a boulder fell and pinned his right forearm, crushing it. After trying for 5 days to lift and break the boulder, desperation took him to great measures like carving his name, date of birth, and date of death into the boulder, drinking his own urine because of lack of water, and videotaping his last goodbyes to his family. Finally, a dehydrated and delirious Ralston decided to bow his arm against a chalkstone and snap the radius and ulnar bones. Using the dull blade on his multi-use tool, he cut the soft tissue around the break. He then used the tool's pliers to tear at the tougher tendons. After Ralston was rescued, his arm was retrieved by park authorities and removed from under the boulder. It was cremated and given to Ralston. He returned to the boulder and left the ashes there.
Number 9.
Truman Duncan. Truman Duncan should be dead. Most people don't survive being run over by a train, but Duncan did. In June 2006, Duncan was working at his job in the rail yards of Cleburne, Texas, when he slipped and fell into the racks while riding on front of a train car that was moving towards a repair dock. Duncan was pulled under the rail car, its wheels grinding steadily underneath. By the time the rail car came to a stop, Duncan had been dragged 75 feet. His lower body was still entangled in the wheels of the train, and he was cut nearly in half at the waist, with one leg attached by a single muscle. Duncan knew he had to fight to stay alive. He was able to reach his cell phone and call 911. As ambulances and medics raced to the rail yard, he made one more call to his family. 50 miles north, helicopter paramedics James Bailey and Teresa Campbell got the call to come to Claiborne. They had little hope Duncan would be saved. Aware that every second counted, a team worked frantically to raise the railcar with the airbags to free Duncan. Despite losing more than half of the blood in his body, Duncan was still alive when the helicopter took off for Texas Health Hospital, 62 minutes after the accident. He was rushed to the trauma unit, where Dr. David Smith took stock of Duncan's staggering injuries. Duncan endured 23 surgeries over the next 6 weeks, astonishing doctors with not only his physical strength, but his mental courage.
Number 8.
Roy Sullivan. Roy Sullivan was a Virginia forest ranger who had an incredible attraction to lightning, or rather, lightning had an attraction to him. Over his 36-year career as a ranger, Sullivan was struck by lightning 7 times and survived each jolt, but not unscathed. His 7th strike put him in the Guinness Book of World Records. In 1942, the first lightning strike shot through Sullivan's leg and knocked his big toenail off. In 1969, a second strike burned off his eyebrows and knocked him unconscious. In 1970, another strike left his shoulder seared. In 1972, his hair was set on fire, and Roy had to dump a bucket of water over his head to cool off. On August 7, 1973, another bolt ripped through his hat and hit him on the head, set his hair on fire again, threw him out of his truck, and knocked his left shoe off. On June 5, 1976, a 6th strike left him with an injured ankle. On June 25, 1977, the last lightning bolt to hit Roy Sullivan sent him to the hospital with chest and stomach burns. His wife was also struck once when a sudden storm welled up as she and her husband were out hanging wash on the backyard clothesline. On September 28, 1983, Roy Sullivan died at age 71, reportedly of a self-inflicted gunshot wound over troubles unrelated to lightning.
Number 7.
Anatoli Bugorski. As a researcher at the Institute for High Energy Physics in Protvino, Bugorski used to work with the largest Soviet particle accelerator, the synchrotron U-70. On July 13, 1978, Bugorski was checking a malfunctioning piece of equipment when an accident occurred due to failed safety mechanisms. Bugorski was leaning over the piece of equipment when he stuck his head in the part through which the proton beam was running. Reportedly, he saw a flash brighter than 1,000 suns, but did not feel any pain. The beam measured about 200,000 rads when it entered Bugorski's skull, and about 300,000 rads when it exited after colliding with the inside of his head. The left half of Bugorski's face swelled up beyond recognition, and over the next several days started peeling off, showing the path that the proton beam, moving near the speed of light, had burned through parts of his face, his bone, and the brain tissue underneath. As it was believed that about 500 to 600 rads is enough to kill a person, Bugorski was taken to a clinic in Moscow, where the doctors could observe his expected demise. However, Bugorski survived and even completed his PhD. There was virtually no damage damage to his intellectual capability, but the fatigue of mental work increased markedly. Bugorski completely lost hearing in the left ear, and only a constant, unpleasant internal noise remained. The left half of his face was frozen due to the destruction of nerves, and does not age. He is able to function perfectly well, save the fact that he has occasional petite mal seizures and very occasional grand mal seizures.
Number 6.
Frane Selak. Luck has always been on his side, or vice versa, for Croatian music teacher Frane Selak, who is well known around the world for as many fatal accidents as spectacular escapes. The first of his numerous near-death experiences began on a cold January day in 1962, when Selak was on a train to Dubrovnik. It suddenly derailed into an icy river, killing 17 passengers. He managed to escape with a broken arm, minor scratches and bruises. A year later, Selak was flying from Zagreb to Rijeka, when a door abruptly blew away from the cockpit of the plane as he was blown off the plane. The accident killed 19 people. However, Selak was lucky enough to land on a haystack and woke up some days later in hospital with minor injuries. It was in 1966 that he met with the third misadventure while traveling on a bus that crashed and plunged into a river. There were 4 people dead. Astonishingly, Selak managed to escape unharmed again. In 1970, Selak was driving alone when all of a sudden his car caught on fire. He was fortunate again to have left the car before the fuel tank exploded. 3 years later, another one of Selak's cars caught on fire, blowing flames through the air vents. To a greater dismay, Selak lost most of his hair. In 1995, Selak was in Zagreb when he was hit by a bus, again leaving nothing but a few injuries. The following year, while driving through a mountain road, Selak drove off a guardrail to escape an oncoming truck and landed on a tree to watch his car explode 300 feet below. In a surprising turn of events in 2003, Selak won the $1 million Croatian lottery, turning the man into either the world's unluckiest man or the world's luckiest one.
Number 5.
Vesna Vulovic. On January 26, 1972, a Yugoslav Airlines DC-9 departed from Copenhagen to Belgrade with 28 passengers and crew. At an altitude of 33,000 feet, a bomb in the cargo section, planted by the Ustashi Croatian separatist group, exploded. The plane disintegrated and crashed into the mountains. In what must be one of the greatest survival stories of all time, stewardess Vesna Vulovic survived the 33,000-foot descent, sitting on the tail of the plane. 22-year-old Vulovic wasn't even supposed to be on that plane. As she later stated in an interview, it was another Vesna who was supposed to be on that flight, but she was happy with the mix-up as it allowed her to make her first trip to Denmark. She ended up with a fractured skull, 2 broken legs and 3 broken vertebrae, one of which was crushed and left her paralyzed from the waist down. Vulovic spent several months in and out of hospitals. Operations allowed her to walk again. She became a celebrity when the Guinness Book of World Records invited her to a ceremony in London with Paul McCartney. She is listed for surviving the longest fall without a parachute. Vulovic is now a national hero in Serbia.
Number 4.
Ron Hunt. While drilling above his head on August 15th, the 6-foot ladder Ron Hunt was standing on started to wobble, so he tossed the drill aside, as construction workers are trained to do, but he fell off the ladder face first and onto the drill. I ran my hands up the drill bit, up to my eye, and put my other hand at the back of my head and felt it coming through the back of my head, he said, and that's pretty much where the shock set in. Doctors said the drill bit pushed his brain aside rather than pushing into it, which likely would have caused serious brain damage or death. After weighing their options, doctors essentially unscrewed the bit by hand to remove it. That must have been a fun procedure.
Number 3.
Mauro Prosperi. Prosperi, a keen endurance runner, took part in the 1994 Marathon des Sables, Marathon of the Sands, in Morocco. Partway through the 6-day, 233-kilometer event, a sandstorm caused Prosperi to lose his way. He ended up disoriented and ran in the wrong direction, ultimately running several hundred kilometers into Algeria. After 36 hours, he ran out of food and water. He survived by drinking his own urine and eating bats resident in an abandoned mosque and the occasional snake found in the desert. Not wishing to die a long drawn-out death, Prosperi attempted to commit suicide in the mosque by slitting his wrists with a penknife he had with him. The attempt failed. Lack of water had caused Prosperi's blood to thicken and clotted the wound before he died. After 9 days alone in the desert, he was found by a nomadic family and taken to an Algerian military camp, and from there to hospital. He was 186 miles off route and reportedly had lost between 30 and 40 pounds, or 18 kilograms, in body weight.
Number 2.
Andes survivors. On Friday the 13th of October, which is a pretty bad start, 1972, a Uruguayan Air Force plane was flying over the Andes carrying a rugby union team from Uruguay to play a match against Santiago, Chile. When the plane was flying through the pass in the mountains, the pilot notified air controllers in Santiago that it was over Curico, Chile, and was cleared to descend. This would prove to be a fatal error. Since the pass was covered by the clouds, the pilots had to rely on the usual time required to cross the pass. However, they failed to take into account strong headwinds that ultimately slowed the plane and increased the time required to complete the crossing. As a result, the turn and descent was initiated too soon, before the plane had passed through the mountains. Dipping into the cloud cover while still over the mountains, the Fairchild soon crashed on an unnamed peak, later called Glacier of Tears, located between Chile and Argentina. 12 people died in the crash. Survivors not only had to withstand the hunger and the fearful mountains, but also 30-degree below zero temperatures during the night. They tried to survive with the scarce food reserves they had until being rescued, but they lost their hope when they heard that the search had ceased on the radio. Desperate owing to the lack of food and physically exhausted, they were forced to feed themselves on their deaf partners to keep on living. Finally fed up with the extremely low temperatures and avalanche threats, as well as anguished by the continuous deaths of their partners and the bad rescue prospects, two of them decided to cross the huge mountains to reach Chile. On the 22nd of December 1972, after being isolated for 72 days, the world found out and knew there were 16 survivors that beat death in the Andes Mountains.
Number 1.
The Impossible Ice Woman. Anna Elisabeth Johansson Borgenholm is a Swedish radiologist from Vänersborg who survived after a skiing accident in 1999 left her trapped under a layer of ice for 80 minutes in freezing water. During this time, she became a victim of extreme hypothermia and her body temperature decreased to 13.7 degrees Celsius, the lowest survived body temperature ever recorded in a human with accidental hypothermia. Borgenholm was able to find an air pocket under the ice, but suffered circulatory arrest after 40 minutes in the water. Borgenholm's case had been discussed in the leading British medical journal, The Lancet, and in medical textbooks. Anna Borgenholm was heading down a steep mountainside, a route she had taken several times before she lost control of her skis. She fell headfirst onto a layer of ice on a frozen stream near a waterfall, landing on her back. A hole opened up in the ice and Borgenholm's head and torso were pulled in as meltwater filled her clothes. Her body became trapped under the ice, which was 20 centimeters thick. When Falkenberg and Neisheim found Borgenholm, only her feet and skis were above the ice.